Welcome to the War Academy channel. Throughout the Second World War, many troop pockets were carried out by all sides. Although the most famous are that of Stalingrad, Cherkasy or Kiev, there were also others that affected smaller groups, but that, in the same way, were troops that were surrounded and that had to be liberated. In this program, we are going to analyze the different guidelines that the Germans were establishing to break these fences, as they gained experience in this type of situation. And it is that, and as we have just indicated, the Germans begin to suffer continuous Soviet sieges, from the general Soviet counteroffensive of late 1941. After analyzing the fundamental principles for the correct rescue of the encircled troops, we will finally see how many of them failed in the rescue operation they launched in Stalingrad. The first thing to do when part of our units have been encircled is to make an assessment of the troops that the enemy is in the area, with respect to those that our side also has there. Generally, if there has been an encirclement, it is assumed that the enemy is superior to us. In any case, this first evaluation has to be done mainly to analyze the time that the encircled troops can resist, and the possibility that there is to send a rescue group capable of breaking the encirclement. If it is determined that it will be impossible to rescue the troops that have been encircled, and that therefore they will be annihilated, leading to a greater reduction in the combat forces that as a whole are in said theater of operations, the solution to be taken must be the breaking of the encirclement by those same troops. If it is determined to the contrary that a relief operation can be carried out from outside, the guidelines to be observed are as follows. First of all, the first thing to keep in mind when organizing rescue forces is that they have to be the highest quality available. The faster the operation is completed, the fewer casualties there will be and the greater the chances of success. It is not advisable to try to maintain a corridor open for a long time, because once contact with the fences has been made, the enemy will try to cut it by all the means at their disposal. Thus, with the intention of avoiding this pressure from the enemy, everything must be prepared so that it is a fast and forceful operation. The second thing that has to be taken into account is the speed with which this rescue operation is prepared and started. Although it is necessary to act quickly, so that the encircled troops do not suffer any kind of collapse, do not launch any hasty operation either, since there will only be one opportunity to free the encircled ones. On the other hand, and although for obvious reasons it is very difficult to do so, it is not advisable to launch the rescue forces while the fence is finishing settling. While this may not make sense, it does have an explanation. And it is that, while the enemy is closing the fence, and therefore, it is still with its troops on the move, it has enough capacity to make rapid changes in its deployment, and go very quickly to the breaking points. Due to this, it is preferable to wait for them to complete the fence, and settle immobile in the territory, as this achieves that their flexibility and their ability to react are less. The third point leads us to the constant communication that must exist between the encircled forces and those of liberation. This communication is vital so that each group has as much information as possible, and is aware of the helpful actions that it can expect from its peers. The fourth point leads us to surprise, this being the most important element of any rupture. You have to attack in a sector and in a direction from which the enemy does not expect it at all. This means that it is not always necessary to choose the area that seems the most favorable or short, since it is there where the enemy will be better prepared. Within this section, it is necessary to assess the possibility of carrying out night raids, to increase the chances of surprising the enemy. In any case, it is assumed that in rescue operations, the fighting will be very intense and the offensive will not stop until the enemy lines are broken. This obviously implies having to keep moving even at night. As a fifth point, we have the need to supply the encircled troops, so that the combat level of their units is the highest possible. According to the Germans, it is almost impossible for a rescue operation to go well, without the help of the encircled troops, which must also initiate an offensive from within the pocket. For these units to carry out their work, it is vitally important that they have all the resources they need. Having seen we are 5 points, Let's now see which of them were breached in the case of Stalingrad, which in the long run caused the Sixth Army to slowly succumb to the Soviet siege. In the first place, it was clear that the analysis carried out by the Germans as soon as the siege occurred was very superficial and was totally wrong. The calculations for the supply fell short. The number of Soviet forces, as well as their combat value, was estimated well below the real one, and the German forces that had to participate in the rescue were too far from the area to arrive in a suitable time. It should be noted that the message that was sent to the encircled troops is that Manstein was heading towards them with an army of the Waffen-SS. Although these troops were heading to Russia from France, they would arrive at the end of January all ready to fight in the surroundings of Kharkov, and not to help in Stalingrad. Second, we have the speed and force with which the liberation attempt was carried out. Manstein began the offensive about 20 days after the siege, with the remains of the units that could be assembled, adding together about 50,000 soldiers and 300 tanks. Although this began as soon as said forces could be reunited, and despite its good advances during the first days, it could not continue advancing without the participation of Paulus's troops, and it was stuck in the face of Soviet pressure that did nothing but increase all over the front. Thirdly, and with regard to the communication between the stock market managers and those from abroad, we have to say that it was quite bad. We have already seen in other programs how the information handled by the German High Command regarding the situation that was being experienced inside the stock market did not resemble much reality. On the other hand, the false hopes sent to Paulus were not minor either. Based on this, the correct coordination between the two was very difficult. Finally, and last, we find the failed attempt to properly supply the encircled troops at Stalingrad. This caused Paulus's troops to suffer progressive attrition, which was making it increasingly difficult for them to be of use in an attack that connected them with the rescue troops. Thus, as we have seen, in the siege of Stalingrad the Germans failed to comply with all the guidelines which they had set themselves to successfully resolve a situation of such characteristics. It is not that they did it on purpose, but simply, they were locking themselves in an unfavorable situation, and little by little they were left with no way out. Despite the Luftwaffe's efforts to supply the enclosures with more than 500 tons of supplies a day, it was assigned a task that it could not carry out. And as for the rescue forces that they hastily tried to muster, they couldn't do more than what was done to get them to the area, either. This leads us to the fact that the fundamental error of Stalingrad was the calculation and the initial assessment that was made, on which no military action could go well. And you, what do you think? Do you consider that these points are correct for rescue operations? Do you think they are still valid today? For what reason does it seem that Stalingrad was all breached? The book from which we have taken these guidelines has been Siege, which I leave in the description, along with other programs that we have made, in which in the same way, we analyzed the anti-partisan tactics of the German army. This is it. Subscribe and support this channel if you like this program, and see you in the next one. See you soon.